Today, we're going to share our top tips for fresh grads about to start work at a law firm. If you stick around to the end of the video, we'll also share some of the biggest mistakes we've seen junior lawyers make and how to avoid them. So, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Lloyd. I used to be a corporate lawyer in Hong Kong together with M, who will appear later in the video. During our time as lawyers, we both supervised a number of interns and junior lawyers, and I personally was pretty involved with graduate recruitment at my firm as well. In today's video, we'll be sharing some of our top rapid-fire tips for junior lawyers about to enter the workforce, or those who might have already started but are still figuring things out. Starting off, we have the first tip, which is to make sure that people know that you're around, but also to not be too overbearing. When you first start a job at a law firm, or anywhere really, it's super likely that you'll be really eager and really enthusiastic to just get involved with work as soon as possible. With this in mind, the first thing that happens after you join a new team is usually that you go around and introduce yourself to everyone on the team. Usually you'll have a designated supervisor that'll take you around the floor and introduce you to everyone on the team. But in the event that they don't do that, or if there's anyone that you missed, it's great to go back and just introduce yourself and let them know that you're there. Sometimes people have work for you right away, and that's great. Other times, people might be really busy on things and may not actually have the time to instruct you on something right away when you join. And that's nothing at all against you as a person, but it's just a matter of circumstance, because at times when people are busy like that, it's just not efficient to rope someone new in. When you're first joining a team as a junior, it can take people a bit of time to fully explain instructions to you to make sure that you're going off and doing the right thing. So if people happen to be super busy, or if they're just not busy at all, they may not have something to instruct you on right then and there. But eventually they will if they know that you're there. As a personal example, there have been several circumstances where a new joiner has joined my team, but I haven't had any time to instruct them on anything for the first day or two or even week of them joining. That said, usually when I get out of these busy spells, I try to look for these new joiners and have a conversation with them and make sure that they have enough work to do and try to get a sense for what they're interested in doing. So the best thing to do in these circumstances after you've introduced yourself and you're looking for work is to check in with people from time to time, but not so often that you become overbearing, especially if you know that they're busy. If you have nothing or very little to do, it might be good to check in with your designated supervisor maybe once a day, and for anyone else in your team that you're interested in working with, maybe check in with them every couple of days.
The next tip we have follows on from the last one, and that's to ask for feedback from your seniors or supervisors on work you've done when there's a good time to ask. Often, there's already going to be a system set up by the firm for seniors and supervisors to give feedback at certain points in time. Plus, the style of some people that you work with may also be to periodically give you feedback on your performance as you work. Aside from that though, it's also good to take initiative and to ask for feedback on how you're doing and for advice on things that you could improve on. This could be in respect of specific tasks that maybe you found challenging, or just generally if you're looking for ways to improve. Broadly speaking, people are usually super willing to give feedback. But similar to our first point, it is important to be aware that it does take people some time to reflect on your performance in order to give you feedback. So do take into account the work schedules of the people that you want to ask for feedback from in order not to come across as too overbearing. For example, if you're helping out with an urgent matter, it may not be the best time to ask for ongoing feedback when everyone is in the middle of working towards a tight deadline. Instead, it might make more sense to ask for feedback after that busy period is over or that deadline has passed. As a supervisor, I always appreciated when juniors asked for feedback since it did show that they were really committed to trying the best. But again, it's also equally important to be considerate of other people's schedules when asking.
Our next tip is to not shoehorn yourself too much into a specific practice area or specialization if you can avoid it, and to try to keep an open mind. So this one largely depends on where you're working, both in terms of jurisdiction and firm. I'm not too sure about other countries, but I know that in the US or Canada, a number of firms will require you to specialize right upon joining, while in the UK and Hong Kong, there's usually a training cycle where you can try out different seats. Oftentimes, people come into legal practice already having an idea of what it is they want to do. Take me as an example. When I was in law school, I really wanted to be a derivatives lawyer because I kind of followed the 2008 financial crisis in a really big way and loved watching movies like Margin Call and The Big Short. But by the time I actually started working and did a number of rotations, I realized that I really actually liked doing corporate work, even though I did like the intellectual exercise of a lot of work that I did in derivatives. Oftentimes people have an idea in their head of what it would be like to be a certain type of lawyer, but give it a try and you might actually be pleasantly surprised or disappointed depending on what it is. The point of this is you never really know until you try, and for that reason, if you have the option to do rotations, definitely take it and don't specialize too early unless you absolutely have to. It's also important to keep an open mind and express to people that you're interested and keen to just learn everything you can. Sometimes if you express too strong of a preference up front, people might be less incentivized to rope you in on matters if those matters don't really fit into that area that you've indicated as being your preference, which kind of in turn means less opportunities for yourself. One time at a welcoming drinks, I saw an incoming lawyer speaking to a partner, not knowing which team that partner was in. That new joiner expressed to that partner that they were interested in a number of areas, but specifically not interested in that partner's practice area. Needless to say, the partner wasn't super excited to hear that, so even if you do have a preference, it's probably best to try to keep that to yourself and not express that to too many people because you never really know how that'll be received. But as always, and as I mentioned a little bit earlier on, it is truly best to try to keep an open mind because you never know what you're gonna like, and it's great to keep your options open.
Our next tip relates to how to take instructions from supervisors, and we have 3 simple points for this. The first is to always have a notepad and pen on you whenever you're going to someone's room for a call or to take verbal instructions. Even if someone is asking you to just pop by for a chat, bring your notepad and pen along. Sometimes instructions turn out to be more detailed than you initially expect, so recording those instructions down on paper is absolutely essential. It definitely doesn't look great if there's some detail that you missed out on, and then you spend a bunch of time working only to produce a work product that really wasn't what was asked for. I also want to mention that it's generally good practice to keep extra pen and paper on you whenever you're going out for anything like a meeting or a court hearing, even if you're using a laptop. Sometimes other people going will forget to bring theirs, and in my experience, it tends to be partners, which is understandable because they're juggling a lot of things on their plate, so it's good to be prepared with extras for them. The next tip is to always ask for a deadline for a task or for a time frame within which someone expects a task to be done. When receiving instructions, it can be hard to gauge how urgent something is, and you'll likely be working on several things at once. By asking for a deadline or when someone wants something to be done by, it helps you plan out your personal capacity as well as decide on what things to work on as a matter of priority. If you don't ask, sometimes things which don't seem urgent might actually end up being urgent, and things which might seem urgent might not actually end up being urgent at all. Lloyd and I have both worked with trainee lawyers who stayed up all night working on something that they received from a partner thinking that it was urgent, when in reality, it really wasn't that urgent and it was something that they could have worked on the following day. Had they asked, it probably would have saved them a lot of unnecessary pain and suffering and overnight work, so definitely keep this in mind. The final tip is to ask questions when necessary to clarify instructions, but try and batch them when you go to a supervisor or a task giver to ask. Sometimes you'll have questions as you're receiving instructions, and that's great. Definitely ask those as you're receiving instructions. But other times you'll start getting questions after you start working on a task. Our advice is to try and collect a bunch of questions before going to ask. It's much more efficient for someone to answer your questions all at once, rather than answering them piecemeal. This is because it does require whoever's answering your questions to context switch in order to think about your questions, and that can mentally take them out of whatever they're doing. At the same time, it's definitely important to ask and not to shy away from doing so. After all, it's still way more efficient for everyone to make sure that you're spending your time doing the right thing, rather than going down the wrong path because you were too afraid to ask questions.
The second last tip we have is to not be too afraid of not knowing things or making mistakes. And if you do make mistakes, just own up to them. It might seem super alarming to make mistakes, but it's not something to panic about. Most mistakes are fixable, and as a junior lawyer, it will be expected that you'll make a bunch of mistakes. I mean, after all, everyone does, even partners. Now, there is a bit of a distinction here too. As a junior lawyer, irrespective of experience, people will kind of expect that you'll be able to proofread documents and catch basic spelling and grammar mistakes. So it's definitely a good idea to try to avoid those types of mistakes, which I would categorize as careless mistakes, if you can avoid it. That said, those still happen to the best of us from time to time, so don't be too worried if it happens once or twice. But in terms of things relating to complex legal principles or technical things that you'd only really know if you actually practice law, it's a bit more acceptable if you just don't know those things or make a mistake in relation to them. In these cases, if there's something you simply don't know, it's fine to ask questions as we mentioned previously. And if you do make a mistake, which does happen, it's important that you own up to the mistake and treat it like a learning experience. And if someone catches one of your mistakes and points it out to you, which will happen, the important thing is just to acknowledge it, take ownership of the mistake, and treat it like a learning experience. And if you happen to catch your own mistake after submitting a piece of work, make sure you tell the person that you submitted it to that you caught a mistake and you wanted them to know. This ensures that the mistake is dealt with in the event that your supervisor happens to not catch it when reviewing your work. At the end of the day, as a junior, your work should always be checked by at least one pair of eyes before it goes to the client or is submitted to court. But again, it's great to flag to people if you catch your own mistakes just because there's human error at every level of the chain as well. So if you recognize something, just point it out.
Our final tip is not to feel the need to stick around super late if there's no good reason to. Sometimes when you first join a firm, it may be tempting to want to stay late, especially if you see a lot of your colleagues doing so. But generally speaking, it's super necessary. You'll get plenty of late nights during your career without a doubt, and there's really no good reason to stick around if you don't have anything to do. If you do get work tasks, but they're not super urgent, don't feel obligated to work really late in order to get them done quickly. Honestly, people do not generally care how late you're in the office, and even if other people are there due to necessity, do try and leave at a reasonable time relative to the amount of work you need to get done. It's best to treat your job like a marathon, not a sprint, so there's no reason to come out of the gate guns blazing if you don't have to. Instead, it's best to try and keep yourself in the best shape possible, both physically and mentally, so that you're better able to tackle and weather the late nights and intense schedule when it's necessary. And if you're curious as to what that looks like, check out Lloyd's video here on a busy week when he was still working as a lawyer and had a 4:30 a.m. finish one night. And check out this video here for a video that the YouTube algorithm thinks that you'll like.